Okay. Um, so it's a very, very long piece in the Biurim where he deliberates and goes through a number of different opinions. So we're just going to look at the conclusions. He says, "Ulesikum hadivarim yotzei lanu kidalahalan." So in order just to be able to conclude, let's see what we can end up with. He's going to come up with 6 concluding points. Point number 1, Im hakilkul b'tzineret hu gadol, de b'sha'a sheruven poteach et haberez, az hamayim yardu, vaday derech ha'ma'azeva l'shimon u'mazikin oto, chayav Reuven l'taken et hatzineret. So if the damage is large and immediate, which means that once Reuven, who lives on the top floor, turns on his faucet, the water starts to flow through some kind of incline and immediately goes down to damage Reuven, Shimon's property. So then Reuven is obligated to fix the pipe. There's no ifs, ands, or buts in our concluding discussion, because since it's a problem that every time he turns on the faucet, he's directly delivering water to Shimon's property, then that's a direct source of damage, and therefore he's going to be liable. Bet imakilkul hu katan velo barur shahamayim yerdu l'Shimon v'rak lifa'amim heim yordim ve'ein hanezek vadai v'tadir. He says if the damage is very slight, it's like a minor leak, and it's not always clear that it's going to leak into Shimon's property. It only happens occasionally, and it's not a large amount of water, and it's not with constancy. As ein l'chai v'truvein l'salek hezeko, then we cannot place the complete onus on Reuven. In other words, we can't say, okay, there's a stain on my ceiling. It sounds so counterintuitive to the way we think. As soon as I see a stain on my ceiling, and I know that that's a plumbing problem from the tenant upstairs, I'm immediately going to complain to the landlord. And if each person owns his own condominium, then it becomes the obligation for the upstairs tenant to fix that immediately. But in halacha, it's not so clear cut. If it's a stain that's been accumulating over the course of months or even years, so then it's not so clear that you can obligate the upstairs tenant with immediacy to fix it. Okay, that's point number 2. Point number 3, Gimel. Gam hecha shahamayim yordu vadai, mikol makom dafka hecha shahatikun karuch bahotza'a meruba, az tzarich Reuven latakno. He says, even when the water is directly flowing every time I turn on the faucet, then if there's a significant loss to Shimon, so then Reuven has to repair it immediately. Aval im efshar letakno bahotza mu'etet, az I efshar lechayvet Reuven deyachol lomar kimli kishitat harosh hanal. But if he says, if the amount of damage is slight, or if the expense or the cost is a slight expense, such that it's not a major expenditure for Shimon himself to fix it, or to it's very possible that all it requires is a new washer. Then Reuven can tell Shimon, if all it requires is a new washer, and it's only going to cost $100 or something, so then Reuven can say, I hold like the Rush, which was an opinion that we saw yesterday, who basically says that the mazik can pass the expense onto the nizik, onto the damagee. Number 4, Kol zeh kishahamayim yordim derech ma'azeva ve'enam yordim miyad. He says, but the aforementioned is only when the water is flowing indirectly through an incline from one place where the pipe is leaking, and it flows sideways, and it starts to leak into another place, into Shimon's apartment. Aval ima kilkul gadol kol kach, debishat ptichat hamayim yordim kvar miyad lamata, as bechol gavnei tzarich Reuven l'salek hezekel. But if every time I turn on the faucet, the water drips directly down and it starts to, and moisture and dripping starts to come right beneath the pipe that's leaking, so then it's clear that Reuven is the responsible party, because that's direct. That's a direct form of damage. The only time that we can deliberate that perhaps Reuven would not be chayiv is if it's an indirect, because the water is being diverted and it flows slowly to another place. Number 5. Kol ze omer davka hecha shahamayim yordim al yedei ma'aser Reuven kishehu poteach et haberez liishtamesh b'meimav. He says, and again, all the aforementioned is only when the water starts dripping every time Reuven turns on the faucet. But let's say the water leaks, the pipe is leaking, regardless of whether Reuven turns on the faucet or not. And you can have that also. You can have that situation with plumbing that regardless of, it's not a washer issue, which has to do with the mechanism in the faucet, but rather it's got to do with a pipe that's broken. In that case, the water will be leaking with more constancy. He says, in this case, the water is coming, the intake of the water is coming into my apartment, and that's where the source of the leak is. Bazeh yesh ladun. V'im avru et sha'on hamoneh mistaver dahavi kimamono hamazik. He says, he talks about something called the sha'on hamoneh. He says that the meter, if the meter is directly related to Reuven's apartment, then it's considered to be Reuven's pipe. Reuven's the proprietor over that pipe that intakes the water, and therefore it is considered to be his property that is damaging. He says, however, if let's say that Reuven is not responsible for paying for the water, right? It's, let's say the landlord is responsible for paying for the water, so then it would be the landlord's perhaps responsibility to pay for it, but that's still unclear. In other words, it could be that if the water is free for Reuven and he's not paying for it, then we can't necessarily obligate Reuven to pay for the pipe. And finally, number 6, Kol masha katavnu haynu midina, ulam im yesh minhag barur b'inyan zeh, yesh leilech al pi haminhag. And finally, the last thing he says is, everything that we've written up until now is based upon the strict letter of halacha. But let's say there's a convention where you live. There's municipal law, right? Or there's just general convention as far as how tenants have to behave in an apartment building when a source of damage emanates from their unit. So then you have to follow the minhag hamaka, follow the minhag of the place. And therefore, I would venture to say that any time that there is damage emanating from your neighbor's property, let's say your neighbor planted a big tree 20 years ago, and its roots are starting to grow into your house or into one of the structures on your property. I believe municipal law, at least probably in most places, would be that it's your neighbor's obligation to remove the source of damage. He would have to pay for the cutting of the roots and the uprooting of the tree if necessary. But it's just important to note that this is a machlokus in the Rishonim, and based on the strict letter of the law, a person could argue that in the absence of any municipal law, I don't feel responsible to pay for it. Okay, next.
Somewhat, I think the person got this mild damage, and thinks that it might be the person who's causing the mild mild damage because obviously there's going to be expenses involved. So
Yeah.
it almost is saying almost, but correct me if I'm wrong, that the person who's got a stain, he's going to kind of suck it up, maybe, in a way.
Correct. There are, in other words,
Rabbi,
yes.
you're going to repeat the gist of the question?
So Warren's point is that it seems like the halacha is leaning more favorably towards the damager than the damagee than what our understanding of municipal law would be. That if it's a minor form of damage and it forms a stain on the guy's ceiling and it's not coming directly from the pipe, but it's because the water is flowing downwards to a place where the water does not originate on the neighbor's property. So when you have all of those conditions met, so halacha is more sympathetic to the damager than the damagee. And he's got it, like Warren's words were that the damagee has to suck it up, I guess.
Yeah,
Or
so it seems.
absorb the minor expenditure. Yes, that seems to be what Rev Stern is saying when it's a minor form of damage. But remember, that's number one according to halacha, and number two, when in the absence of municipal law. Whenever you enter into a contract where you're going to be living in a condominium building, in an apartment building, remember, you commit yourself to abide by the standards and rules of the building. So if the condo association says that if your plumbing causes any form of damage, minor or major, and it results in any kind of disfigurement or deterioration of your neighbor's property, you're responsible to attend to it within, I don't know, X number of days. So then that's the contract that you've entered into, regardless of what the halachic arguments may be. And probably the same is true in Israel as well, I would imagine.
Somehow have to compromise.
Yes, and
Often you see the law could go one way or the other, but the parties are ultimately responsible to figure it out, so to say.
right, Warren is saying that there's the letter of the law and what happens in real life, where the parties have to negotiate and work things out amicably to the best of their ability. Right. So I guess the objective of an exercise like this, even when municipal law differs from the Choshen Mishpat law, is to recognize what your rights are, especially when you're dealing with another frum person. And I guess it's helpful in helping to frame things for each other when you want to do the right thing. Okay. Yes. Yeah. That's an excellent question. Let me repeat the question. You live in a retirement building. Let's say, I don't know. We'll make up a name. The Conversatory. Okay. So you live in a building called the Conversatory, and that's what they should call it because everyone's having conversations. The Conversatory, and you have three tenants who go away for the summer to Florida, for the winter to Florida. You have guy on the seventh floor, and his toilet overflows. And because of his toilet having overflowed, his water is leaking in his apartment and leaks down to the 6th floor. Well, the guy on the 6th floor also went away to Florida for 2 months, and he's oblivious of the water that's accumulating in his apartment, and that water leaks down to the 5th floor. So the question now is, who's responsible for the damage that occurs on the 5th floor neighbor? Could you argue that the tenant on the 6th floor is partially responsible? Because had he been living in his apartment, he would have been able to attend to the damage immediately. Because he was away, the damage accumulated unknown and then flowed down to the 5th floor. So it's an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that question. Something definitely worth investigating, but that's a real life question that I'm sure that there's got to be some kind of legal precedent for this in secular law, and there's probably a legal precedent for it in halacha as well. Okay.
I think, Rabbi, that if it got apportioned, then the vast majority would be from the initiator. I mean, you don't have a responsibility to stay in your apartment and look for damages, although I guess if your property is causing damage, someone should come and check in on it every now and then. But I think if it got apportioned, you'd think the majority would be from where the damage originated.
You would think, although I could easily understand the judge saying that the 7th floor guy and the 6th floor guy have to divide the responsibility among themselves. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Okay. All right. Let's go look at the next halacha, Tes Zayin. And so this, so basically what we've learned so far is that you're not allowed to pour material or leave material next to your neighbor's property if that's going to cause damage to your neighbor's property with immediacy. Okay, so let's say pouring urine from your urinal, because this is before indoor plumbing, pouring your urinal contents against your neighbor's wall will either damage the wall material itself or will cause corrosion of the soil, in which case it'll weaken the foundation of the wall, causing long-term damage over the course of time. But since you're doing it directly, it's really gira delay, it's your arrows that are causing the damage. So then what you're doing is usher, and you have to distance anything that is potentially corrosive from your neighbor's property. Okay, so now we get to the next halacha, Tes Zayin. Asur laso shovach b'soch ha'ir, mipnei sheyifsedu hayonim zironei haginot sheba'ir. It says you're not allowed to set up a dove coop inside a city. You're not allowed to, let's say, go into your backyard in Thornhill, set up a dove coop where you cultivate birds, pigeons or doves. And what's the reason why you cannot do that? So listen to the reason. He says, because the birds are going to be consuming the seeds of the adjoining fields that are along by your property. So we're dealing with an agricultural community. So Farmer Ruvain has fields, and Farmer Shimon has fields also, but he wants to set up a dove coop as well. A dove coop, the nature of a dove coop is not that the birds are caged, but rather that the birds are free to come in and out of the dove coop. That's how they would create a dove coop, because they're generally docile birds. They would fly away and then come back to the coop because they know that's where they'll get their next meal. But the problem is that by you allowing your birds to fly freely off of your property, they're going to be pecking away at the newly planted crops of Farmer Ruvain's soil that's right next door. So Uzroy, and this is true even if you live in the city. In the city, this is really what we're talking about, is within the city, because within the city, people plant things in their gardens, and the birds may end up pecking away at the seeds that were planted for when people want to grow their vegetables or their flowers or whatever. But he says, Uzroim hashtuchim begagos uvachatzeros liyavesh. He says, and that they'll peck away also at seeds that are being left out to dry on people's rooftops. Let's say a person harvests sunflower seeds, right? And he wants to place them. You have to dry sunflower seeds. You have to either roast them or dry them. And what was typically done is a person would take a tarp, put it on his roof, and put things up there to dry in the summer months. That's the way the Gemara describes how people made raisins as well. Okay, so if you let your birds dwell in your backyard, they're going to come and peck away at this stuff. And so he says, that's when you're in the middle of the city. Let's say you're outside the city on farmland. He says, he says, if you're on farmland outside the city, then you have to distance yourself at least 50 cubits from the next adjoining field. And 50 cubits is about 150 feet or 50, no, let's see, an amma is about a foot and a half, so, or a half a meter. So you'd have to distance yourself 25 meters, let's say, or 25 yards from your neighbor's property. O shel hefker, or if it's not your field, it has to at least belong to nobody. Ki hayonim einam shatim yoter minun amma b'sadeh ki nitmalei kreisam b'ma shegadol toch nun amma. He says because these types of doves or pigeons generally do not fly more than these 50 amot in a field, because they are able to fill themselves with what they find within 50 amots. Okay, we're going to hold it here for today. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulty that delayed us. And when Mitzvah Hashem will pick it up Monday morning. Have a great day, everybody.